You mustn't
Without
let him sign
realizing
those
she had
papers
everything,
tonight.
the Duke let
But
his
why?
mistress humiliate her before
He
the
said it was
heirs.
just a formality.
Candles flickered in brass sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to breathe along with the guests. The air was thick with the mingled scents of spiced wine, burning wicks, and the faint perfume of roses that grew in the duchy's hidden gardens. Tonight was not merely a feast. It was a gathering of power, a night when alliances were made and reputations forged or destroyed. Lady Eveline moved through the hall with quiet grace, her gown of midnight blue brushing the marble floor as she walked. She carried herself like one who belonged, though her heart raced with the tension of the evening. She had grown up learning the art of patience and observation, of speaking softly while listening carefully, of waiting for the moment when strength could reveal itself. Yet as she glanced around the hall, she could feel the weight of every gaze, every whisper, and every unspoken judgment. At the center of the room stood Duke Adrian, tall and imposing, a man whose presence could silence a hall before a single word left his lips. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp, and his expression carried a weight that few could penetrate. He had ruled the duchy with iron will and cunning, and there were rumors of curses and shadows that clung to him like a second skin. Yet beneath the cold exterior, there was a man who had once loved too deeply and been betrayed. That love had hardened him. Tonight, Adrian's eyes, dark as the storm clouds that often gathered over the northern mountains, swept across the guests until they landed on Eveline. A spark of something unspoken flickered there, a recognition, a tug, a question. But before it could grow, it was gone, hidden behind a mask of composure that had become second nature to him. And then there was Maricel, the duchy's most beautiful, most cunning woman, who moved with the confidence of a predator and the charm of a queen. She was Adrian's mistress, a presence that demanded attention, and she knew precisely how to use it. Tonight she had arrived with a knowing smile, fully aware of the tension she could stir between Adrian and Eveline. She was like a flame to a moth, and Eveline felt the heat even from across the hall. Maricel approached Eveline with a tilt of her head, her eyes glittering with amusement. "Lady Eveline," she said, her voice smooth, silk over steel, "you look, well, rather ordinary tonight. Are you sure the blue suits you?" Eveline's lips pressed together, but she did not respond. She bowed her head politely, but her mind churned with indignation. How dare this woman speak to her in such a manner? She had grown in the halls of her ancestors, had learned the ways of diplomacy, and yet here was Maricel, seeking to humiliate her before the assembled heirs of the duchy. Adrian's gaze flickered briefly toward the two women. He saw the slight rise in Eveline's chin and the controlled tension in her hands. And then, before he could intervene, Maricel leaned closer, her voice just loud enough for a small circle of courtiers to hear. "You know," she whispered, "some would say the duchy deserves someone more impressive." Her laugh was soft but sharp as a dagger. "Do you think the future will remember you, Lady Eveline?" A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered, drawn to the exchange. Eyes that had been sipping wine and murmuring about politics now turned to Eveline, measuring her, testing her. A dozen different judgments hovered in the air, invisible yet palpable. Eveline's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stand taller. She had endured many trials in her life. A few cruel words from a mistress would not topple her. Adrian stepped forward then, his movements smooth, deliberate, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of uncertainty that Maricel had always known how to awaken in him. "Maricel," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority, "that is enough." Maricel's smile did not waver. "I only speak the truth, my lord. Surely the lady must know her place." Eveline's pulse thumped in her chest. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but she knew that in this hall, words could be twisted, and dignity could be shattered with a single misstep. She lowered her gaze, bowed slightly, and let silence speak for her. Adrian's expression darkened, and for a moment the shadows of the hall seemed to gather around him. There was a storm in his eyes, a battle between desire, frustration, and a cold calculation he could not escape. He wanted to see Evelyn rise above this, but he also feared the challenge her quiet strength presented to him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Courtiers murmured, shifting uneasily in their seats. Some thought Evelyn would break, would crumble beneath the subtle cruelty of Marisel. Others thought she would retaliate with cunning. But Evelyn, with her heart pounding and her hands clenched at her sides, did something unexpected. She smiled, not the timid smile of submission, but a calm, quiet smile that spoke of patience, endurance, and inner strength. Marisel tilted her head, confused by the calm in Evelyn's demeanor. She had expected fear, humiliation, or at least visible irritation. Instead, Evelyn's composure seemed to illuminate the room. Adrian noticed it too, the subtle power that radiated from her even as she appeared to bow under the scrutiny of the court. The feast continued, but an invisible tension lingered between the three of them. Marisel, sensing her advantage slipping, sought new ways to provoke. Adrian, torn between reprimanding his mistress and acknowledging Evelyn's quiet strength, found himself watching her every move with a focus that unsettled him. Evelyn, though outwardly calm, felt her heart twist with both longing and frustration. How could the man see everything in the hall but not see her worth? As the evening wore on, the shadows lengthened. Candlelight flickered across the gilded walls, casting long shapes that seemed to move like living things. A chill wind swept through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of rain and the faint whisper of old magic that clung to the duchy's stones. It was said that the northern duchy had been touched by curses in ages past, that the walls remembered betrayals and heartbreaks, that the shadows themselves could choose whom to favor or punish. Evelyn could feel it now, the subtle brush of unseen eyes watching her. She shivered slightly, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that the night was far from ordinary. Adrian, standing by the high table, finally allowed himself a long look at Evelyn. For a fleeting moment, the mask of indifference slipped. He saw the truth that others did not, the resilience in her posture, the fire behind her quiet eyes, the grace that hid strength beneath humility. And for the first time in many years, he felt an unfamiliar pull toward someone he had long thought beneath notice. Marisel, sensing the change in the air, laughed softly, a sound like breaking glass. She moved closer to Adrian, trying to reclaim her sway over him, but even her practiced charms felt brittle tonight. The room seemed to lean toward Evelyn, as if the very stones of the duchy favored her endurance. Then, as the Duke raised his goblet for a toast, a strange shadow fell across Evelyn. It moved unnaturally, sliding over the floor like a liquid whisper. The guests froze, following her gaze in confusion. The candles flickered violently, and a sudden draft swept through the hall. The shadow seemed to curl around her, as if acknowledging her presence, as if testing her. Evelyn felt a shiver pass through her, a mixture of fear and fascination. She did not know if it was magic, or a trick of the light, or something older and wiser than any living creature. Her breath caught in her throat. Adrian's eyes narrowed, following the shadow, and Marisel's confident smile faltered for the first time that evening. The hush that had fallen over the hall was complete. Every noble, every servant, every courtier waited in tense silence. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something she had not known before. There was more at play in the duchy than politics and appearances. There was power in the unseen, power that recognized her, not for her beauty, nor her title, but for something deeper, something she had not yet fully understood herself. The shadow lingered a heartbeat too long before slipping away, leaving the hall in trembling silence. Evelyn's heart raced, not with fear but with the first spark of awakening. She would have to face challenges far beyond the cruelty of a mistress, far beyond the scrutiny of nobles. And she would have to do it with courage, with patience, and with the knowledge that even in humiliation there was strength waiting to be claimed. Adrian's gaze did not leave her. For the first time he saw her, truly saw her, and the realization unsettled him. The pull he felt was not desire alone. It was something more, a recognition of equal power, a danger to his control, and a longing he had buried beneath years of ice. And as the candles flickered once more, casting shadows across the grand hall, Eveline knew one truth with absolute certainty. The night was only the beginning. The night after the grand feast, the duchy seemed different to Eveline. The walls of her family's castle, usually cold and imposing, felt alive with whispers she could almost hear. The shadows in the corridors stretched longer than they should have, flickering as if moved by some unseen hand. Outside, the northern wind howled against the towers, rattling windows and shaking the torches that burned along the battlements. Eveline had retreated to the gardens, the secret walled gardens that her ancestors had planted centuries ago. They were her refuge, a place of quiet reflection, where the scent of night-blooming flowers mingled with the earthy dampness of the soil. Tonight, the garden seemed charged with energy. The air was thick, not with rain alone, but with something older, something ancient that had lain hidden beneath the stones of the duchy. She walked along the cobblestone paths, her hands brushing the tops of roses and lavender. Her thoughts returned again and again to the events of the feast. Maricel's cruel words had not broken her, but they had left a sting that would not fade. Worse, the way Duke Adrian had watched her, his eyes dark and unreadable, left her unsettled. She did not understand the pull she felt toward him, nor did she understand why she wished he had spoken up for her, even when the hall had been silent. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement near the far edge of the garden. A shadow that moved without a body, sliding over the ground like liquid. Eveline's heart quickened, but she did not flee. Instead, she took a slow, careful step forward. She had felt the same presence at the feast when the candlelight had danced unnaturally across the hall. Something was watching her, something that knew her name and recognized her strength, though she had yet to claim it. A voice, soft and distant, whispered in her mind. "Child of the northern line, do you know what you carry?" Eveline's breath caught. She looked around, but the garden was empty except for the plants and the wind stirring the leaves. The voice was not loud, yet it was unmistakable. It was not Maricel nor Adrian. It was something older, something that had been in the duchy long before anyone alive had walked its halls. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling only slightly. The shadows swirled closer, curling around the roses and lavender without touching them. "You carry power, power that is yours by birthright, yet you have yet to see it." Eveline clenched her fists. "I am nothing. I am only a daughter. How could I possibly have power?" "You have endured humiliation. You have watched the unworthy claim what should be yours, and still you remain. That is power." Eveline's knees felt weak. She wanted to deny it, to tell herself she was simply clever, simply patient, but the words resonated in her heart. Perhaps the voice was right. Perhaps she had been blind to her own strength. Meanwhile, in the grand chambers of the castle, Duke Adrian paced restlessly. The feast had left him unsettled, more than he cared to admit. He could not shake the image of Eveline standing quietly while Maricel mocked her, nor the strange flicker of shadow that had appeared around her. He had thought he was beyond fear, beyond surprise, but seeing Eveline in that moment, so calm, so controlled, had disturbed him in ways he could not name. Adrian's mind was a battlefield. He had lived decades ruling the duchy, controlling every detail of his world, yet Eveline seemed to slip through the cracks of his understanding. He wanted to protect her, yet he feared her growing power. And most of all, he feared the stirring of feelings he had long buried: admiration, longing, and something dangerous that even he did not fully understand. Maricel entered his chambers without knocking, as she always did. Her smile was sharp, designed to disarm, yet tonight it felt brittle. "You're distracted," she said, her voice smooth. Was the feast not to your liking? Adrian turned to her slowly. It is not the feast that disturbs me, he said, his voice low. It is her. Her? Maricel's laugh was light, but there was a flash of curiosity in her eyes. Do you mean Lady Evelyn? Surely you do not take her seriously. Adrian's jaw tightened. I see more in her than I should, and it unnerves me. Maricel tilted her head, sensing a crack in the fortress of his composure. Do you wish me to leave her be, or shall I ensure she never rises above her limitations? Adrian's gaze darkened. He did not answer immediately. Maricel had always thrived on manipulation, and he knew she would push until she found weakness. But tonight he felt powerless to stop the tide. Watch her, he said finally, but do not interfere. Maricel's eyes gleamed with something that was part amusement, part warning. As you wish, my lord. Back in the garden, Evelyn sat on the cold stone bench, her mind racing. The shadows had receded, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves. Yet she felt their presence still, a whisper in the air that promised secrets, power, and danger. She did not understand what this meant, only that something had been awakened inside her. The next morning, she returned to the castle's library, a vast room filled with ancient tomes and dusty scrolls. Evelyn's fingers traced the spines as she sought knowledge, seeking answers about the duchy, its history, and the mysterious powers that seemed to stir around her. She found references to an old curse, a magic that had been whispered about for generations. The curse had been placed on the duchy long ago, a magic meant to test the heirs, to see who was worthy to rule. One passage caught her eye. The child who stands in the shadow of humiliation yet remains unbroken shall awaken the power that lies dormant. Only by embracing courage and truth shall the curse yield. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Could this be about her? Had the strange shadow and the voice been testing her? She closed the book, her heart heavy with both fear and a strange sense of purpose. Adrian found himself drawn to the library that evening, unable to resist the need to see Evelyn again. He entered quietly, hoping she would not notice him, but Evelyn's awareness was sharper than he expected. You are here again, she said softly, without looking up from the tome she had opened. Adrian cleared his throat. I could not sleep, he said simply. I find myself unsettled. Evelyn closed the book slowly, her dark eyes meeting his. The castle changes at night, she said. It speaks if you listen. Adrian frowned. And what has it said to you? Evelyn hesitated. Should she reveal the whispers and shadows? Could she trust him? Yet something in his gaze, something raw and unguarded, made her want to share it. It has said I carry power, she admitted. I do not yet understand it, but it has recognized me. Adrian's expression darkened, a mixture of fear and fascination. Power, he murmured. Be careful, Evelyn. Power can tempt even the strongest hearts. And sometimes it is not just the unworthy who fall prey. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. She understood what he meant. The very curse that recognized her might also demand a price, and yet she felt a strange thrill. For the first time, she sensed that her life was larger than the walls of the castle, larger than the expectations of nobles and heirs. She was part of something older, something that called to her with a voice she could barely hear but knew she had to follow. Days passed, and Evelyn's awareness of the duchy's magic deepened. She began to notice subtleties, the way shadows shifted around her, the way the wind seemed to answer her unspoken thoughts, the way animals and birds reacted to her presence. Slowly she realized that she was not just a passive observer. She could influence the world around her, even if only in small ways. Adrian, watching from a distance, noticed these changes. His emotions were conflicted. On one hand, he admired Evelyn's courage and growing strength. On the other, he feared it. He feared that he could no longer control the forces that stirred in the duchy, nor could he control the pull he felt toward her. Maricel, sensing the shift, grew more desperate. She whispered rumors to the council, sowed doubts about Evelyn's capability, and tried to provoke Adrian's jealousy. Yet Eveline remained calm, and Adrian, though unsettled, began to see the limits of Maricel's influence. One night, Eveline wandered to the fountain at the center of the gardens, her reflection shimmering in the water. The wind carried a whisper of the ancient voice again. "The test has begun. Will you rise or falter?" Eveline stared at her reflection. She saw a young woman, strong yet uncertain, noble yet vulnerable, and she knew that the path ahead would demand courage, wisdom, and heart. She would face trials both from the world and from herself. But for the first time, she did not feel fear alone. She felt readiness. The next evening, the duchy's hallways were filled with a strange tension. Maricel had arranged a meeting with Adrian, hoping to force confrontation, but their discussion was cut short when a servant burst into the room, pale and breathless. "The garden's something strange," the servant said. "The shadows, they moved, and Lady Eveline, she was speaking, though no one else was there." Adrian exchanged a look with Maricel, whose confidence faltered. He felt a strange surge of protectiveness, not for his pride, but for Eveline herself. He realized that whatever was stirring in the duchy, Eveline was at its center, and he could not ignore it. As Eveline walked back to her chambers, the shadows seemed to follow her, but this time, not threateningly. They curled around her feet and whispered in a language she could not yet understand. And for the first time, she felt a bond with the ancient magic of the duchy, a connection that promised both danger and power, challenge and discovery. She paused at the balcony, looking out over the dark landscape of the northern lands. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the distant howl of wolves and the rustle of unseen creatures. Somewhere in the night, the castle seemed to breathe, alive with secrets and waiting for the moment to reveal them. Eveline knew one thing clearly. The curse had awakened, and she was no longer merely a passenger in her own life. The path ahead would demand courage, patience, and strength beyond anything she had known. And though the road was uncertain, she felt the first spark of determination ignite within her. Somewhere in the dark corridors of the castle, Adrian watched silently, his heart heavy with longing and fear. He did not yet know how deeply the curse would test them both, nor did he understand the truth he was about to face. Eveline was no longer a woman to be ignored. She was the heart of the duchy's fate, and her awakening would change everything. The shadows whispered once more, curling around the stones and the wind, and Eveline, standing alone in the gardens, whispered back, her voice steady, ready, and unafraid. "I am ready." The castle seemed heavier in the mornings now. The sun rose pale over the northern lands, spilling light over the gray stone walls, but the warmth never reached the halls. Shadows lingered in corners where they had no right to be, and whispers seemed to follow every step. Eveline had grown accustomed to this feeling, the quiet awareness that the duchy itself was alive and testing her. She walked through the corridors, her fingers brushing the carved banisters. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, candle smoke, and distant rain. Every day brought new lessons, and every lesson carried the weight of the curse that had awakened. Eveline had discovered she could sense the subtle energies around her, the way shadows shifted when she approached, the way the air seemed to vibrate when she felt strong emotion. It was frightening, yet thrilling. Adrian, meanwhile, had grown restless. He could not sleep, could not think clearly, because Eveline's presence lingered in his mind like a shadow he could not escape. He had watched her in the garden, seen her face in the library, and felt her strength grow with every passing day. The realization unsettled him. He had been a man who commanded the duchy with certainty, yet Eveline's quiet power challenged him in ways he had never imagined. Maricel, ever watchful, had begun to notice the change as well. Her influence over Adrian was weakening, and Eveline's calm confidence unsettled her. She moved through the halls with calculated charm, but Eveline's reputation was growing quietly among the servants and courtiers. Whispers of respect, of admiration, of curiosity had begun to follow Eveline like a shadow. One evening, Eveline entered the castle's deepest library, a room few ever visited. The walls were lined with ancient tomes and scrolls, many of them forbidden to all but the heir of the duchy. Eveline's fingers traced the spines as she searched for answers. She needed to understand the curse fully, to learn its rules, its dangers, and its promise. She found a volume that seemed older than the castle itself, bound in dark leather and etched with symbols she did not recognize. Opening it, she found passages that spoke of power and trial, of courage and truth. One line stood out. Only those who face the darkness within their hearts may awaken the light that can break the curse. The path is perilous, and the heart is the battlefield. Eveline felt a chill run down her spine. She had faced humiliation before, had endured scorn and cruelty, yet this felt different. This was not just about surviving the eyes of nobles or the words of a mistress. This was about facing herself, her doubts, her fears, and her desires, and she realized that to awaken fully, she could not hide from her own heart. The next day, Adrian summoned Eveline to the council chamber. He had not spoken to her alone since the events in the garden, and the air between them was thick with unspoken words. She entered quietly, her gown brushing the stone floor, and found him standing by the tall windows, arms crossed, staring at the distant mountains. "Lady Eveline," he said, his voice steady but low, "you have been spending much time in the library and the gardens. I wish to understand what you have learned." Eveline hesitated. Should she tell him about the shadow, the whispers, the awakening power she sensed? She did not yet trust him fully, though part of her longed to share the truth. Finally, she spoke. "There is more to this duchy than the walls and the heirs," she said. "There is something alive here, something that watches and tests us. I do not yet understand it, but I feel it and I know it is connected to me." Adrian's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, his dark gaze fixed on her. "And do you understand what it wants?" Eveline shook her head. "Not yet. But I know it is testing courage, strength, and truth. I feel it demanding something from me, and I am willing to face it." Adrian's jaw tightened. He had wanted control, certainty, and calm in his domain. Yet Eveline's words stirred something he had not felt in years: fear, admiration, and a longing he could not name. "Be careful," he said finally. "Power awakens not only strength but also vulnerability. There are forces in this duchy older than any of us, and not all of them can be trusted." Eveline nodded, understanding the warning. "I will be careful," she said, "but I cannot ignore what is calling me. I must face it." Meanwhile, Marisel was plotting. She had watched Eveline quietly, noting the changes, the confidence in her posture, the calmness in her gaze, the way shadows seemed to respond to her presence. Marisel knew that if Eveline fully awakened, her own influence over Adrian would vanish. She could not allow this. She sought out Adrian, using her charm and subtle flattery, trying to remind him of her loyalty and her control. "Do not let her rise too far, my lord," she said softly. "She may appear harmless, but she is clever, and cleverness can become dangerous." Adrian turned to her slowly. "I do not fear cleverness, I fear truth, and Eveline carries more truth than anyone I have known." Marisel's eyes widened slightly. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Adrian's gaze was heavy, and for the first time she sensed that her influence was slipping. That night, Eveline returned to the gardens. The wind was stronger, whipping through the trees and tossing petals across the stone paths. She felt the presence of the shadows again, stronger now, closer. They moved around her like living things, responding to her thoughts and emotions. A voice spoke, clearer than before. "The test continues. Will you rise or will you falter when the heart is challenged?" Eveline stood tall, her hands at her sides. "I will rise," she whispered, her voice steady. "I will not falter. I will face whatever is required." The shadows seemed to pulse with approval, curling around her and then retreating into the darkness. A faint glow shimmered in the garden, and Eveline felt a surge of energy in her chest. She realized that her connection with the magic of the duchy was growing stronger. that she could no longer ignore it or deny it. Adrian found her there, standing among the shadows, her face illuminated by the faint glow. He had come searching, drawn by a mix of concern, curiosity, and an emotion he could not name. "Evelyn," he said softly, stepping closer, "you should not be here alone." "I am not afraid," she said, turning to face him. Her eyes were bright with determination. "I need to understand this. I need to face it." Adrian took a step closer, his hand hovering near hers, though he did not touch her. "I do not doubt your courage," he said. "But there are things in this world, things older than us both, that demand respect and caution." Evelyn nodded. "I understand, but I must act. I cannot wait for answers that may never come. If I falter, then I will learn. If I rise, then I will know my strength." There was a long silence. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant sound of the northern hills, the rustle of leaves, and the faint echo of the duchy's hidden magic. Adrian could feel the energy in the air, the growing bond between Evelyn and the ancient forces of the land. He felt both awe and fear, and he realized that the woman before him was no longer someone to be ignored, no longer someone he could control. She was powerful, alive with purpose, and his heart stirred in ways he had thought impossible. Days passed, and the tension in the castle grew. Maricel continued her schemes, trying to undermine Evelyn in small ways, spreading rumors, manipulating minor events, and testing Adrian's loyalty. Yet Evelyn remained calm, her growing awareness of the duchy's magic allowing her to anticipate and counteract subtle threats. Adrian, despite his desire to maintain control, found himself watching Evelyn more than he had ever watched anyone. He saw her courage, her wisdom, and her quiet strength, and he realized that his own heart had been stirred in ways he could not resist. He could no longer view her as merely a daughter of the duchy. She was its heart, its spirit, and perhaps even its salvation. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the castle, Evelyn performed a small ritual in the garden. She had discovered a pattern in the shadows, a rhythm to their movements that suggested the magic of the land could be influenced by intention and will. She whispered words she did not fully understand, guiding the shadows around her in a careful dance. Adrian watched from the balcony, his breath caught in his chest. He saw the faint glow of energy, the way the shadows responded to Evelyn's will, and he felt a mixture of awe and fear. He realized with a shock that the woman he had underestimated was becoming something far greater than he had imagined. Maricel, however, was not idle. She had followed Adrian, and she watched Evelyn from the shadows, her face twisted with envy and frustration. "This cannot continue," she whispered. "She is too strong, and he will follow her if I do not act." The night deepened, and the shadows in the garden grew restless. Evelyn felt a surge of power and knowledge, but also a test she did not anticipate. The voice of the ancient magic spoke again, stronger and more demanding. "Your heart will be challenged. Will you choose fear or truth? Will you falter when temptation and doubt arise?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, but she stood tall. "I will choose truth," she said aloud, her voice steady and unwavering. "I will face fear. I will not falter." The shadows seemed to bow around her, responding to her courage and determination. The wind shifted, carrying a faint warmth, a promise of guidance and strength. Evelyn felt a bond with the duchy itself, as if she were no longer merely a visitor in this world but a part of it, connected to its history, its magic, and its destiny. Adrian descended into the garden then, his footsteps quiet on the stone paths. He stopped beside Evelyn close enough that he could feel her energy radiating. "You are remarkable," he said softly, "more than I ever realized." Evelyn turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "And you have yet to see everything," she replied, a faint smile on her lips. "There is more to come, more that I must face." Adrian's hand hovered near hers, but he did not touch. "Whatever comes," he said, "I will stand by you, not as a lord to his subject, but as someone who finally sees the truth of your strength. Eveline's heart quickened. She had longed for recognition, for acknowledgement of her worth, and now it had arrived, not through praise nor through titles, but through honest understanding. The bond between them deepened, silent and unspoken, yet undeniable. But even as they stood together, the shadows shifted again. A faint movement in the distance, near the edge of the garden, caught Eveline's eye. A presence, darker and colder than before, watched from the edges of the night. She felt a chill run through her spine. The ancient magic was testing her further, reminding her that the path ahead would not be simple. Marisel had not yet given up, and the forces of the duchy, both seen and unseen, had their own designs. Eveline realized that the trials were only beginning, that courage and wisdom alone might not be enough. She would need strength, patience, and the guidance of those who truly understood her heart. She turned to Adrian, her expression firm. "The challenge is not over. We have only begun to face it. The curse, the duchy, and those who would stand against me, they are not finished yet." Adrian nodded, his gaze steady and resolute. "Then we face it together," he said. "Whatever comes, we do not stand alone." And in the quiet of the northern night, with shadows curling around them like living things, Eveline felt the full weight and promise of her destiny. She would rise. She would face the trials of heart and magic, of fear and temptation. And she would do so with courage, strength, and the knowledge that she was not alone in the darkness. The curse had awakened, the hearts had been tested, and the reckoning was only beginning. The northern wind had grown fierce. It tore across the castle's ramparts and whistled through the empty corridors, carrying with it the scent of rain, earth, and the lingering magic of the duchy. The skies were gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to brood over the land, casting shadows over the stone walls like a warning. The castle, old and steeped in history, seemed to wait, holding its breath, as though aware that tonight everything would change. Lady Eveline stood in the garden once more, her midnight blue gown pressed against her, damp from the mist rising off the stone paths. Her hair clung to her cheeks, and her eyes, dark and determined, reflected both the storm above and the fire within. She had spent weeks preparing herself for the trials of the curse, studying the books, listening to the whispers in the shadows, and learning to understand the energy that flowed through the duchy itself. Yet tonight, she knew that knowledge alone would not be enough. Courage, heart, and unity would be the key. A flicker of shadow moved at the edge of the garden, curling like smoke. Eveline recognized it immediately, not as a threat but as a part of the test. She held her head high, raising her hand slightly, allowing the energy of the duchy to flow through her. The shadows responded, swirling around her like a cloak, waiting, watching. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Duke Adrian, tall and imposing as ever, stepped into the garden, his expression unreadable but his eyes betraying the storm of emotion within. He had seen her power grow over the past days, had watched her strength and calmness, and had come to realize that the woman before him was no ordinary heir. She was the heart of the duchy, the key to its survival, and perhaps even its redemption. "Eveline," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the wind, "you do not have to face this alone." Eveline turned to him, her eyes meeting his. She felt the depth of his concern, the acknowledgement of her power, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. "I know," she said quietly, "but this test, it is mine to face, and I must choose courage no matter the cost." Adrian stepped closer. "Then I will stand with you," he said firmly, "not to lead but to support. Whatever comes, we face it together." For a moment, silence reigned in the garden. The shadows swirled and twisted around them, sensing the unity between them, and a faint glow shimmered in the mist. Eveline took a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the power of the duchy flow into her. She was no longer a passive observer. She was a part of it, a guardian and a force to be reckoned with. The first challenge came suddenly. From the far edge of the garden, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness and radiating malice. It was Marisel, her face pale and twisted with envy and desperation. She carried a staff tipped with black crystal, a remnant of the forbidden magic she had sought to control. "You think you are ready," Marisel called, her voice sharp and echoing across the stones. "You who have no true power, no right to command what you barely understand." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she did not falter. "Power is not given," she replied steadily. "It is earned, and I have earned it through courage, patience, and truth." Adrien moved to stand beside her, his presence strong and protective. "Step back, Marisel," he warned. "Your schemes end tonight. Whatever you have done, it will not succeed." Marisel laughed, a sound like cracking ice. She raised her staff, and dark tendrils of magic shot toward Evelyn. The shadows in the garden rose to meet them, twisting and turning like living creatures, protecting Evelyn from harm. She extended her hands, guiding the energy of the duchy, and felt the surge of power respond. The shadows became a shield, a wall of movement and light, bending around her like water. The duel of magic was not one of brute force alone. It was a test of will, of heart, and of clarity. Evelyn had to remain calm, to let her courage guide her, and to trust in the energy that had awakened within her. Marisel, though skilled in manipulation, was unprepared for the unity between Evelyn and the ancient forces of the duchy. Slowly, the darkness began to falter, curling away like smoke under the sun. Adrien, seeing the tide turn, raised his voice. "It is over, Marisel. Yield or leave this place." For a brief moment, Marisel's eyes flickered with fear. She realized that her influence over the duchy and over Adrien had slipped entirely. Evelyn's strength, combined with the acknowledgement and support of Adrien, had rendered her schemes powerless. With a cry of frustration, she turned and fled into the shadows, leaving only a faint trace of dark energy behind. Breathing heavily, Evelyn lowered her hands. The glow around her faded, leaving the garden bathed in the soft light of the storm. She turned to Adrien, who was watching her with awe and something deeper in his eyes. "You did it," he said quietly. "You faced it and you prevailed. The power, it is yours, but it is also more than yours. It is the duchy recognizing you, acknowledging your strength." Evelyn felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the magic around her. "I could not have done it without you," she said. "Your support, your trust, it allowed me to face what I could not face alone." Adrien stepped closer, his hand brushing hers lightly. "You have taught me much as well," he admitted. "I thought I knew strength, knew control, knew power. But you have shown me that courage, humility, and heart matter more than any command or title." The wind softened, carrying away the last remnants of Marisel's dark energy. Shadows retreated to their corners, bowing subtly in respect to Evelyn's courage. The garden felt alive, at peace for the first time in generations, as if the duchy itself was acknowledging the triumph. In the days that followed, the castle changed. Courtiers whispered of Evelyn's bravery, of her growing wisdom, and of the way the shadows seemed to move in her presence. Adrien, once cold and distant, softened in ways the nobles had not expected. He was still commanding, still cautious, but there was a new respect in his eyes for Evelyn and for the forces they now served together. Marisel's absence was a relief, though some whispered that she would return. Evelyn did not fear her. She had faced darkness, both external and within her own heart, and had emerged stronger. The lessons of courage, patience, and trust were now ingrained in her very being. One evening, as the storm clouds parted and the first light of dawn touched the northern hills, Evelyn and Adrien stood on the balcony of the castle. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scent of earth and roses, the promise of renewal. "You have done more than awaken your power," Adrien said softly. "You have reminded me of what it means to trust, to see, and to feel. I cannot ignore it anymore. I see you, Evelyn, as you are, strong, wise, and courageous." Eveline's heart swelled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something she had not expected, joy. "And I see you," she said, meeting his gaze. "Not as a duke, not as a ruler, but as someone who has learned, who has felt, and who can stand beside me. We have both changed through this journey." Adrian reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. It was a gesture of partnership, of acknowledgement, and of trust. "Together," he said. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The shadows around the castle seemed to bow. The wind whispered softly through the towers, and the first rays of sunlight illuminated the ancient stones. Eveline felt the duchy itself breathe, alive and at peace, yet ready to test its heirs when needed. She had faced the curse, faced fear, faced envy, and had triumphed, not through force, but through courage, wisdom, and heart. The weeks passed, and life in the castle settled into a new rhythm. Eveline continued to study, to understand the magic of the duchy, and to strengthen her connection with the ancient forces that had once tested her. Adrian supported her, offering guidance, protection, and companionship. Their bond grew stronger, silent yet undeniable, built on respect, admiration, and shared trials. The court began to see Eveline not merely as a noblewoman, but as a leader in her own right. Her intelligence, her courage, and her calm presence inspired loyalty and trust. Even the servants, who had watched quietly from the shadows, spoke of her with admiration. The duchy itself seemed to recognize her as the heart of its future, and its shadows moved with a gentle obedience around her. And yet, Eveline knew the lesson of the curse. Power was not permanent, and vigilance was always required. She would face challenges in the future, but she no longer feared them. She had learned that true strength came from courage, heart, and the willingness to embrace one's own power while remaining humble and true. Adrian stood beside her one evening as they watched the sun set over the northern hills. "You have done more than lift the curse," he said. "You have changed this place, and you have changed me. I cannot imagine the duchy without you, or myself without you by my side." Evelyn smiled, feeling the weight of the past months lift, replaced by a quiet confidence and a deep sense of fulfillment. "And I cannot imagine facing it all without you," she replied. For the first time in generations, the castle felt truly alive, its magic flowing harmoniously with its heirs. Shadows and light, power and humility, courage and heart, they all moved together in balance. Eveline and Adrian, united in respect, trust, and quiet love, had forged a bond that could withstand any test the duchy or the world could send. As night fell, stars glittered over the northern lands, reflected in the waters of the castle's fountains and the dew on the gardens. The wind carried only peace now, and the castle seemed to hum with quiet approval. Eveline knew that challenges would come again, as they always did, but she also knew this truth. Courage, truth, and heart could overcome even the darkest shadows. And in the quiet of the northern night, with Adrian's hand in hers, Eveline felt a joy she had never known, because she had faced fear, endured trials, and emerged not just unbroken, but transformed. The duchy was safe, the curse lifted, and its heir had finally claimed her destiny. And together they would face whatever came next, not as master and subject, not as ruler and heir, but as equals, partners, and hearts united in trust, courage, and love.